Okay, so in addition to being bilingual and bicultural, we have to convey an equivalent message between two languages and two cultures. And so that's what interpreting is, and this is where interpreting differs between itself and transliterating. Okay, so interpreting is taking one full language and culture and interpreting it into a completely different language and culture. You have to be sensitive to environmental factors, as the PowerPoint slide says, that enhance or impede communication. You know, that could be anything that's either visual or auditory, obviously. So often I have to remind people, if you turn off the lights, they can't see me. Sometimes you can get in the ambient light of like the PowerPoint slide or of the movie or whatever. You can kind of get in there and they can see you enough through that, but I've had it to where it's completely blacked out, like at a play or something like that, and we have to constantly remind the sound booth, hey, you guys need to keep a light on us because the deaf people can't see, even though there's usually, sometimes it's blacked out on stage, but there's still noise happening, and so we want to let the deaf people know what's going on. And so anyway, that's pretty important. Something else, oh, so many funny stories about noise. Anyway, something else, I think this is pretty funny. One of my deaf friends and I were taking a class together, and it just cracks me up. I wouldn't do this with a deaf client, but I did it because she was my deaf friend. Anyway, one of our interpreter friends was interpreting for her, and it was at this university where they were doing all kinds of construction outside, and the AC wasn't working in the building, but there were jackhammers going on outside, so like literally if you opened a window or something, you couldn't hear what the professor was saying. You just couldn't. It was just too loud. But it was burning up in that room. It was crazy. And so the deaf girl, my friend, walks over. She's just angry because she saw some of the hearing people had closed the windows, and she knew it was hot. And so she walks over there and she opens the window and she goes back and sits down and looks at the interpreter. And I looked at her and I was like, what are you doing? And she was like, I'm hot. And I was like, okay, but they can't hear. And she's like, I don't care, my interpreter can hear, that's good enough. Because the interpreter is standing right next to the teacher. So I was like, okay, hold on just a second. And so I told the interpreter, I was like, go ahead and sign to her. Just have a conversation with her. And my deaf friend was like, okay. So my deaf friend and the interpreter start having a conversation. And I just walk back and forth between them. And my deaf friend's doing this, you know, she's trying to get around to be able to see the interpreter. She's like, I can't see. And I was like, exactly. The hearing students, they can't hear the teacher. And she was like, oh. And so she got up and walked over and closed the window. But, you know, I mean, those things, any of those kinds of environmental factors can impede our ability to do our job effectively. I mean, very often I am the interpreter and I can't hear what's going on, or I can't see enough to be able to interpret. One of the difficult areas of being an interpreter now is video remote interpreting, VRI. It's kind of like VRS in the sense that it's done on a video screen, but it's not paid for by the government. It's a consumer paid expense, whether it's the doctor's office or whomever it is that's paying for it, where the interpreter can be remotely accessed and they pull up on a video screen. Well, what's bad about that is when people start throwing out words like, well, look at this or look at that, I, the interpreter, I'm not in the room, so I can't see what they're pointing at. So that would be definitely an environmental factor that would impede my ability to effectively interpreting what they're talking about. Anyway, and obviously, lastly on the slide, it says that we behave in a professional or ethical manner. Well, duh. If I haven't browbeaten you into anything this semester, hopefully I have shown you that ethical dilemmas occur all the time, and it's something that you need to be prepared for. On slide 4, basically the same information, just that you're a transliterator. The difference being that, again, I'm not going from one whole language to another whole language. Now what I'm doing is I'm going from one whole language to a form of the same language. And what that means is, in our case at least, being signed English interpreters or vice versa, is I am, say for example, I'm speaking English, okay, or I'm listening to an English speaker rather, and I am now listening to that English and I'm putting it into a signed format that a lot of times I'm doing in case, conceptually accurate signed English, where I'm taking what I'm hearing and I'm putting it kind of in English word order, and I'm mouthing all of the words of the English on my mouth. Especially for a deaf person who maybe reads lips, wants to know the specific words that those teachers are using or their boss is using or things like that. I definitely transliterate. I probably transliterate the most in college settings because a lot of those students want to know the particular vocabulary word that that person is using. And so conceptually conceptually accurate, signed English would look like, and I may have given this example before, but instead of saying, you know, my nose is running, because this is physically running, my nose didn't sprout legs and start to run off, I would say, I would sign and mouth, my nose is running like that, because that's conceptually accurate. And so that's, in general, what we do as transliterators. And if you take any of the, especially like interpreting 2 and 3, we'll talk about that, or interpreting in educational settings especially as well. So anyway, that's enough of that. Moving on, the work of interpreters, or output. Again, your input and your output are going to vary. Again, just like the target and source language, it depends on which language you're hearing or seeing and which language you're going into, right? I will say that speaking on the topics of interpreting and transliterating, you will hear people almost always use interpreting meaning either one, unless they're really trying to be specific. So just because you hear somebody say that they're interpreting something, they may actually be transliterating. So don't be so quick to judge an interpreter if you see them mouthing and doing all that stuff. Oh, she uses so much English. That may be what the deaf person requested. She may not actually, or he may not actually be interpreting. They may be transliterating. So just be aware of that. Let's see. Also, if I were to, I forgot to mention that, if I'm transliterating the opposite direction, it may be that I'm looking at a deaf person who uses more of a conceptually accurate signed English, or a varied, like cued speech, you would say cued speech transliterator, not a cued speech interpreter, right? Although you will hear it used. Technically, they are a transliterator, because cued speech would be a form of English put into a signed, I hate to even use the word signed, but that kind of a format, hand motion format. Alright, in the next video we're going to start talking about consecutive versus simultaneous interpreting. I guess that's it for this one. Thanks!